Look at the footwork there. That's the spear jab we've heard about. Absolutely clinical.
That's it, get back, it's over.
Long Beach, California, August 2nd, 1964. The Long Beach International Karate Championships. Over 1,500 spectators packed into the municipal auditorium, the air thick with anticipation and the sharp smell of canvas mats. On the main floor, a 23-year-old martial arts instructor from Oakland stood 5'7", weighing barely 135 pounds. His name was Bruce Lee, and most people in that room had never heard of him. Across from him stood Greg Nelson, a 250-pound kickboxer from San Diego, thick-necked and barrel-chested, with arms like bridge cables. Nelson had been fighting professionally for 3 years, 12 wins, no losses. He looked at Bruce Lee the way a semi-truck looks at a bicycle. "You're too small," Nelson said, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. He wasn't being cruel. In his mind, he was stating a fact. What happened in the next 8 seconds would be replayed, debated, and analyzed for the next 60 years. This is the story of the moment Bruce Lee proved that size, strength, and conventional wisdom meant nothing against perfect understanding. Bruce Lee was not supposed to be at this tournament. He was a teacher, not a competitor. He ran a small martial arts school in Oakland's Chinatown, teaching a modified version of Wing Chun he was beginning to call Jeet Kune, the way of the intercepting fist. His students were mostly Chinese immigrants and a handful of curious Westerners who'd heard rumors about this intense young instructor who moved like water and hit like iron. But Ed Parker, the founder of the Long Beach tournament and one of the most respected martial artists in America, had seen Bruce teach. Parker understood that Bruce wasn't just skilled, he was different. He moved with a speed and precision that didn't look real even when you were watching it happen. Parker had invited Bruce not to compete, but to demonstrate. The demonstration was supposed to be a controlled exhibition. Bruce would show some techniques, the audience would applaud politely, everyone would go home, but Greg Nelson had other plans. Nelson represented everything Bruce Lee was fighting against in the martial arts world of 1964. He was a product of the American kickboxing system, power-focused, size-dependent, built on the assumption that a bigger, stronger man would always defeat a smaller, weaker one. It was physics. It was common sense. It was, Nelson believed, inarguable. When Ed Parker announced that Bruce Lee would be demonstrating a new approach to combat, Nelson stood up from the audience. He was in street clothes, jeans, and a white t-shirt stretched tight across his chest. "I'll volunteer," he said. The room went quiet. Parker tried to redirect. "Greg, this is a demonstration, not a match." "I know," Nelson interrupted. "I just want to see if this new approach works against someone who actually fights." He climbed over the barrier separating spectators from the mat. No offense to the little guy. For Bruce Lee, this moment carried extraordinary weight. He was not yet famous. He had no film career, no television show, no global recognition. He was a Chinese immigrant in 1960s America, trying to convince a skeptical martial arts community that their entire understanding of combat was incomplete. If he failed here, if size and strength crushed his philosophy in front of 1,500 witnesses, his credibility would evaporate, his school would empty. His ideas would die as a footnote. For Greg Nelson, the stakes were simpler but no less real. He was a professional fighter. His reputation was built on dominance, on being the biggest and strongest man in any room. If he lost to someone 50 pounds lighter, if he was made to look foolish by a demonstration artist, his career would become a punchline. But there was a deeper conflict at play, one that transcended these two men. This was a collision between two philosophies of human potential. Nelson represented the traditional Western view, that physical gifts determined outcomes, that nature distributed power unevenly and you either had it or you didn't. Bruce Lee represented something revolutionary, that perfect technique, perfect timing, and perfect understanding could overcome almost any physical disadvantage. One of these philosophies would walk away validated, the other would be shattered. Bruce Lee looked at Greg Nelson and smiled. Greg Nelson wasn't a bully. That's important to understand. He was a dedicated martial artist who spent years building his craft. Born in San Diego in 1941, he started boxing at 14, moved into kickboxing at 18, and by 1964 had established himself as one of Southern California's most feared competitors. His fighting style was straightforward, aggressive pressure, heavy leg kicks, and a right cross that had ended 7 of his 12 professional fights. He trained under Chuck Norris for 6 months before branching out on his own. He respected discipline, he respected technique, but he also believed, and his experience had confirmed, that at the highest levels of combat, physical advantages were insurmountable. A heavyweight would always beat a lightweight. A strong man would always overpower a weak one. It wasn't arrogance, it was reality. Nelson had volunteered for this demonstration because he genuinely wanted to see what Bruce Lee could do. He'd heard the rumors, the 1-inch punch, the 2-finger push-ups, the impossible speed. But rumors were just rumors. He wanted to see if this small Chinese instructor could actually function against someone who'd spent years learning to hurt people for a living. "I'm not trying to embarrass you," Nelson said as they faced each other on the mat. "I just want to see what you've got." Bruce Lee's smile didn't waver. "Then let me show you." To understand what happened next, you need to understand what Bruce Lee had discovered. Traditional martial arts in 1964 were built on forms, predetermined sequences of movements practiced until they became automatic. The theory was that in a real fight, your body would execute these forms instinctively. Bruce Lee had come to believe this approach was fundamentally flawed. "Classical forms," he would later write, "are useless in actual combat. They are rigid and dead patterns. When you're in a real fight, there is no time to think of forms. You must adapt, flow, and respond to what is actually happening." Bruce had been developing what he called the style of no style, an approach that emphasized direct, economical movement stripped of all unnecessary motion. No wasted energy, no telegraphed attacks, just pure immediate response. He described it this way: "Be like water. Water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend." But the philosophy went deeper than technique. Bruce believed that most people never access their true potential because they were trapped by limiting beliefs about their size, their strength, their capabilities. "If you always put limits on what you can do, physical or anything else," he said, "it'll spread into your work and your life. There are no limits. There are plateaus, but you must not stay there. You must go beyond them." Greg Nelson represented those limits made flesh. A 250-pound wall of muscle and bone, standing as physical proof that some advantages couldn't be overcome. Bruce Lee was about to demonstrate otherwise. The crowd pressed forward. Ed Parker stood at the edge of the mat, concerned. This wasn't what he'd planned. A demonstration was controlled, safe, educational. What was about to happen could be none of those things. Bruce Lee stood in what looked like a casual stance, feet shoulder-width apart, hands loose at his sides, weight slightly forward on the balls of his feet. To Nelson, it looked like nothing. No guard, no defensive posture, just a small man standing still. Nelson settled into his fighting stance, left foot forward, hands up, chin tucked, orthodox kickboxing. He'd done this 1,000 times. He felt the familiar pre-fight electricity in his muscles, the sharpening of focus. He could feel the weight difference between them. He had 115 pounds on this guy, 115 pounds of bone and muscle that could generate force Bruce Lee's frame simply couldn't match. "Whenever you're ready," Bruce said quietly. Several witnesses would later describe what they felt in that moment. James Lee, Bruce's training partner and close friend, said, "I knew what was coming. I'd seen Bruce move, but everyone else in that room had no idea what they were about to witness." Jun Rhee, the famous Taekwondo master who was sitting in the third row, later recalled, "I remember thinking Nelson was going to hurt him. I actually considered stepping in and stopping it." Even Ed Parker, who'd invited Bruce specifically because of his skill, felt a flash of doubt. Nelson was a professional fighter. Bruce was a teacher. The size difference was absurd. Maybe this was a mistake. Nelson stepped forward and threw a testing jab, not full power, just a rangefinder, something to measure distance and speed. It was fast, professional fast, the kind of jab that had set up knockouts in real fights. It hit empty air. Bruce had already moved. What happened next took 8 seconds. Nelson's jab extended into space where Bruce Lee had been a millisecond earlier. Before Nelson could retract his arm, Bruce had closed the distance, not away from the punch, but through it, slipping inside Nelson's guard with a motion so fluid it looked choreographed. Bruce's lead hand touched Nelson's extended arm, not a strike, just a contact point, like a sensor gathering information. Nelson felt it and immediately tried to adjust, pulling his arm back and loading his right hand for a counter cross. He had time, he had position, he had 115 pounds of advantage. He had nothing. Before Nelson's right hand could travel 6 inches, Bruce Lee struck. It wasn't a dramatic, wind-up punch. It was a short, straight blast that originated from his hip, traveled through his shoulder, and exploded into Nelson's solar plexus with a sound like a drumstick hitting a side of beef. Nelson's breath left his body, his forward momentum stopped as if he'd hit a wall. His eyes went wide, not from pain, but from shock. How did he hit that hard? Bruce didn't pause. The first strike had created an opening. His second strike, a ridge hand to Nelson's neck, landed before Nelson's brain could process the first. The third strike, an open palm to the sternum, sent Nelson stumbling backward, arms flailing for balance. 8 seconds after Nelson threw his testing jab, he was sitting on the mat, breath ragged, staring up at Bruce Lee with an expression witnesses described as complete disbelief. The auditorium was silent. 1,500 people collectively held their breath. Bruce Lee extended his hand. "You wanted to see what I've got," he said. "That's what I've got." Nelson took the hand. Bruce pulled him to his feet. For a long moment, Greg Nelson just stood there, one hand pressed against his chest where Bruce's palm strike had landed. He was breathing hard, partly from exertion, mostly from shock. He was a professional fighter. He'd been hit before. He'd been knocked down before, but he'd never been dismantled like that. He never felt so completely outmatched against someone who, by every physical measure, should have been at a disadvantage. "I didn't even see the second hit," Nelson said finally. His voice was quiet, meant for Bruce, but the microphones Jeet Parker had set up for the demonstration caught it. "I felt it, but I didn't see it." Bruce Lee nodded. "You weren't looking for it. You were thinking about what you wanted to do, not responding to what was actually happening." The crowd erupted, not polite applause, roaring, standing ovation approval. They just witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible. June Rhee would later say, "In that moment, Bruce Lee changed martial arts in America. Before that demonstration, everyone believed size and strength were everything. After it, we had to reconsider everything we thought we knew." Jeet Parker approached the center of the mat, relief and amazement on his face. He raised Bruce's hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, Bruce Lee." But the most important reaction came from Greg Nelson. As the crowd celebrated and photographers rushed forward, Nelson pulled Bruce aside. "Teach me," he said. "Whatever that was, I need to learn it." Bruce Lee smiled. "That wasn't a technique, that was understanding, but yes, I can teach you." The footage of that 8-second exchange would become one of the most analyzed sequences in martial arts history. Frame by frame, instructors would study Bruce's footwork, his economy of motion, the way he generated power from relaxation rather than tension. But the technical analysis missed the larger point. What Bruce Lee demonstrated that day wasn't a new technique, it was a new possibility. Within a year, enrollment at Bruce's Oakland school tripled. Students came from across California, then across the country, wanting to learn from the man who'd made size irrelevant. But more importantly, an entire generation of martial artists began questioning the assumptions they'd built their training on. Could a smaller person defeat a larger one? After August 2nd, 1964, the answer was no longer theoretical. It was documented. It was real. Bruce himself seemed to understand the significance immediately. In a letter to a friend written 3 days after the tournament, he wrote, "I showed them today that it's not about being better than someone else. It's about being better than you were yesterday. Greg Nelson is a good fighter, strong, skilled, experienced. But he was fighting what he expected me to be, not what I actually was. That's the real lesson." Greg Nelson, for his part, became one of Bruce Lee's most dedicated students. He would train with Bruce for the next 2 years, incorporating the principles he'd experienced firsthand into his own approach. He never lost another professional fight, but his style transformed, less reliance on power, more emphasis on timing and precision. "Bruce taught me that strength is a tool, not a strategy," Nelson would say decades later. "I'd spent years building my body, but I'd never built my understanding. That 8 seconds taught me more about fighting than 3 years of professional matches." The story of Bruce Lee and Greg Nelson isn't really about martial arts. It's about the stories we tell ourselves about limitation. We all carry a version of Greg Nelson's assumption, the belief that certain advantages can't be overcome. Someone else is stronger, smarter, better connected, better funded. Someone else has natural gifts we don't have. The gap is too large, the difference is insurmountable. Bruce Lee's philosophy directly challenged this, not through positive thinking or motivational rhetoric, but through demonstrated reality. The 8 seconds at Long Beach proved something profound. Perfect understanding and execution will overcome imperfect advantages almost every time. But there's a deeper lesson here, one Bruce himself articulated best. Knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. Greg Nelson knew how to fight. He had technique, experience, and physical gifts. But Bruce Lee understood fighting at a level Nelson hadn't yet reached. He'd stripped combat down to its essential principles: balance, timing, efficiency, adaptation. He'd removed everything unnecessary and perfected what remained. This is available to anyone in any field. The question isn't whether you have natural advantages. The question is whether you're willing to develop such deep understanding that advantages become irrelevant. Bruce Lee put it this way: "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times." Greg Nelson had practiced being big and strong his entire life. Bruce Lee had practiced understanding. Understanding 1. Long Beach, California, August 2nd, 1964. 8 seconds that changed everything, not just for Bruce Lee or Greg Nelson or the 1,500 people who witnessed it, but for everyone who would later watch the footage, hear the story, or face their own 250-pound obstacle and wonder if size really mattered. Bruce Lee proved it didn't, not because he was special, but because he'd done the work to make it irrelevant. The real question isn't what would you have done in Bruce Lee's position. The real question is, what are you doing in your own?